Bet the Board.
What do you mean you don't bet? I mean, I don't bet. You know, I don't gamble. I don't. I never have, and I never will. Yeah, right. I'll bet you $20 I can get you gambling before the end of the day.
You owe me 15 grand, pal.
Pay him. Pay that man his money.
It's the Bet the Board podcast.
God likes me. He really, really likes me.
In the end, I wound up right back where I started. I could still pick winners, and I could still make money for all kinds of people back home. And why mess up a good thing?
Here's Payne Insider and Todd Fuhrman.
Welcome into the Bet the Board podcast. College football season previews officially in the rearview mirror. We shift our focus to the National Football League. I'm your host, Todd Fuhrman, joined as always by NFL guru, professional bettor, the man, the myth, the legend. He really needs no introduction. We give him one anyways. Payne Insider. And Payne, I give you a ton of credit, my friend. I know college football isn't your bread and butter. You've been counting the days, the hours, and the minutes until we could get to your beloved NFL.
I do enjoy the NFL. I thought the college football previews went extremely well. That's the feedback that we've been given, implementing Brad into the fold. So I think all the previews, and obviously a little bit biased here, but again, the feedback we get, it's best in market, and I think the NFL previews will bear the same fruit.
I have to give you credit. Normally, I'm reluctant to do so, especially in a public forum like this. But, after we did the first Power 5 college football preview, you came up with a great idea to kind of divide and conquer, and I really believe that paid dividends. That was probably the number one thing year over year that people told me. They go, man, Brad and Payne were on it on the offensive and defensive side of the ball. So unfortunately for you, though, you have to do all the heavy lifting around here. I just kind of throw the ball at the rim. I sit back and I let you tell me where I'm right and where I'm wrong, more often than not in the latter camp when we look at all 32 NFL teams going forward.
Yeah, no problem telling you when you're wrong.
So, trust me, I am well aware of that fact, having done these with you going all the way back to 2014. But rather than the pomp and the pageantry and the back and forth banter-wise, we got a lot of ground to cover, so we can get right into the AFC East is where we'll start things, and we may as well go to the top of the heap with the Buffalo Bills, who when we look across the board at their odds, they are the division favorites, a shade better than even money at a lot of shops. Their win total, 10.5, shaded to the over. As far as the AFC, just north of 5-1 if you shop around, at a price just shy of 10-1 in the gauntlet that is the AFC this season. The biggest thing with this Bills team, they obviously want to get over the hump, something that they haven't been able to accomplish over the last handful of years. They've now won 10 games each of the last 4 seasons, still seeking to break their Super Bowl appearance drought that dates back to 1993. Over the last 3 years, the Bills are number 1 in point differential. They were dealt a little bit of a tough break as far as their special teams were concerned with a non-football related injury to Nyheim Hines. A friendly reminder, Payne, why guys our age shouldn't be riding around in jet skis if it precludes us from podcasting. But when we look at Buffalo's offense, Ken Dorsey took over for Brian Daboll, and we had a lot of questions about how that group was going to perform. But so much of the season-long data, there's noise in those numbers because Josh Allen dealt with an elbow injury, so it became difficult to try and assess. We look at the ground game. We'll see if James Cook is ready to inherit the number 1 responsibilities as Devin Singletary, the leading back from last year, is off to Houston. Stephon Diggs did what Stephon Diggs does, albeit with a little bit of drama this offseason. He seemed to have put that in the rearview mirror. We'll see if a number 2 receiver can emerge. But when you look at Buffalo from an offensive standpoint, is it more of the same for the Bills, or where do you have the most confidence that this unit can repeat what it's done the last couple seasons, or raise some major red flags if they're going to regress?
What I've seen from Buffalo is, on paper at least, the Bills' offense had better parts last season than they had in 2021, and I think it's probably fair to say that again heading into the 2023 season, that the offensive parts are better now than last season. I think it's also, pretty obvious with, a season of data running the offense by himself that Ken Dorsey is a top-tier mind. It's why we've kind of heard this behind the scenes for a few years now. It's why Miami desperately tried bringing Dorsey back to the U last offseason. When you kind of look at maybe an area where you have some trepidation, it's probably the offensive line. Did make some strides last season as run blockers. And then, once James Cook got out of the doghouse for that opening week fumble and Dorsey was smart enough and figured out how to manufacture ways to hide Cook in pass protection, the Bills' run game efficiency soared. Buffalo's O-line and running backs as a tandem led the league in yards before contact per rush. Cooks was like a massive part of that, led the league in yards before first contact, averaged 6.2 yards per touch. All signs are pointing to a much larger role when you look at, like, just if you're reading articles, Cooks being praised in camp pretty much every single day.
It's incredible. I don't know if it's real or they're just trying to prop the guy up for just that reason. Everything you read, Cook's being talked about like he's the second coming of Thurman Thomas.
Yeah, I mean, he is... Man, he's multiple, he's quick, he's fast, he's shown to have some good vision. He feels like a better NFL running back than what we saw in college, but that really wasn't, he wasn't a workhorse. He wasn't an every down back. Obviously, Damian Harris comes in as well. But the one thing that, aside from the improved run blocking and getting Cook a little bit more involved in the offense as the season went on, Dorsey was also able to identify some of the increased rates of lighter boxes that defenses were playing, especially on early downs, because they were fearful of Josh Allen in the throw game. And so when Dorsey called run plays, the Bills were top 5 in success rate on those early down runs. I think the O-line, though, needs to take a step up in pass protection because the schedule of pass rushing defenses this year projects to be top 5. You look at Deion Dawkins, I think he's a proven commodity at this point at left tackle, 6 straight seasons of positive pass protection grades, back-to-back seasons of being a fringe top 10 pass protector. Buffalo signed Connor McGovern, the other one. There's now 2 in the same division, which is kind of wonky, but he's going to play left guard. He's coming off his best season. But I think there's questions from like the center on to the right? I mean, Mitch Morse has battled concussions, so you have Buffalo cross-training Ryan Bates at center. Ryan Bates is battling a rookie, Osiris Torrance, as the starting right guard. Bates is kind of replacement level. Torrance more known for run blocking than pass protection. And then you have right tackle Spencer Brown, who has played below replacement level his first 2 seasons. So you see Buffalo bring in a veteran like Brandon Shell to compete there. So I think very much like that's the question mark is offensive line center, right guard, right tackle. The weapons around Josh Allen, I think, are better. We know what Stephon Diggs is, and they've kind of, I wouldn't say Buffalo has, but Diggs has taken some shots at the Bills organization this offseason, right? He kind of restructured his contract in the hope that DeAndre Hopkins was going to come, and that never came to fruition. But we listened to Diggs' presser recently, and he said it's water under the bridge. I think we know what he is, right? 2.4 yards per route run. He was actually used more as a downfield threat in Ken Dorsey's system. Gabe Davis didn't really make the improvement that we had projected last season, and he came out and is aware of this and said he's worked harder this offseason than ever before. You have Khalil Shakur, who kind of flashed. 3 of his more impactful games came week 18 and in the playoffs, so you're hoping that kind of propels him to start this season a little bit better. So we're projecting a year 2 bump for Shakur. Then you have Deontay Hardy. I think he's probably the sleeper of this group. He had that breakout 2021 season for New Orleans, 2.7 yards per route run. Dalton Kincaid apparently has been as advertised in camp to this point, first-round pick, kind of a Travis Kelce clone. Kincaid's just a matchup nightmare. Tight ends typically, though, have a really tough rookie transition, but I think Ken Dorsey's smart enough. I don't think he asked Kincaid to be someone he's not. And if you listen to Dawson Knox, he basically called Kincaid a slot receiver in his most recent presser.
Yep.
And then we really haven't even mentioned Josh Allen yet, and I think this is maybe where we see the uptick. Right. I mean, it was obviously a very good season in totality when you look at all of the metrics in the data, but I think it's probably fair to say Allen's play was uneven and could improve. If you looked, like Allen, basically started the year adjusting to Dorsey's system. It's a new voice. And there was a lot of bad variance that led to Josh Allen struggling mightily in the red zone. And that was something we outlined week to week in season last year. I mean, Allen was 34th out of 38 qualifying quarterbacks in red zone EPA the first 10 weeks. The red zone woes were basically not just the turnovers, but a bad combination of success rate as well with those turnovers. Buffalo had the second most EPA loss due to turnovers in the NFL last year. I think that improves. And then the injury, the elbow injury late in the Jets game. And if you look, pre-injury, Josh Allen was 3rd in EPA plus completion percentage over expectation. Post-injury, 13th. And I think if you are gonna kind of watch my steps here, if you are a hardcore Bills fan, or someone that has great information, because it's obviously vital to helping you find an edge as a bettor. You're aware Josh Allen had an off-field issue as well. Dealt with a very messy breakup towards the latter part of the season. It finally just became public 2 months ago. So on paper, right, like I think the Bills' offensive talent is better. We should get more even play from Josh Allen if health improves and the off-field distractions, subside a little bit. But I think that has to be the case because Buffalo is, you look at the schedule, like far more difficult year over year. If you look just based on win totals, Buffalo faces the fourth toughest schedule. Our in-house power ratings, Buffalo is tied for the second toughest schedule. And then by strength of team unit, right, we're projecting the Bills to face a top 5 schedule of overall defenses and pass defenses. Both were below league average last season. And Todd, to some kind of small extent, and I know we talked a little bit prior to recording, the professional bettors I speak with, it's in the back of their minds that with Sean McDermott completely running and calling the Bills defense now, if his unit struggles relative to expectation, that somehow McDermott insists on Ken Dorsey dialing back the pace and the pass rate. And we know both those things could probably hinder some offensive efficiency.
For sure. If you're going to castrate your offensive coordinator and limit some of their capabilities instead of allowing them to play at a breakneck pace and go out there and mask some of your defensive deficiencies, it could create issues. And part of the reason that we have questions about this team defensively is, as you alluded to, Sean McDermott takes over as defensive coordinator. Leslie Frazier, we can call it what we want, a sabbatical, a break, but he's not with the team calling plays. And this is a group last year that finished 4th in the league as far as counting stats are concerned, allowing 19.1 points per game, 7th in total defense. They did allow a touchdown on just 45.6% of opponent red zone possessions, oftentimes difficult to sustain, especially when you look at the dynamic developing in the division where things have been upgraded on the offensive side. They did, however, have the second highest adjusted games lost to injury, and they saw the pressure rate really fall off a cliff without Von Miller. We'll get into the Von Miller injury a little bit later as we have Deepak Shona to talk about some of the most impactful injuries that the AFC East teams are facing this season. But defensively coming into last year, Payne, you talked at great lengths about how good this group could be with what they had in the secondary. If they got a healthy Tre'Davious White, we knew about their safety combination of Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer. Rarely did they have all three of those guys on the field operating in a top-level capacity. So when we look at this team defensively, if they get better injury luck, but the talent isn't quite up to what some of the preseason prognostications suggest, where does this defense slot for you if we're working under the assumption as well that Von Miller ain't going to be 100% right out of the gates?
I think it's a good defense again, right? I mean, you mentioned some of the weirdness there with McDermott and Leslie Frazier, and my understanding is McDermott wanted to take over play calling and told Leslie Frazier it was his way or the highway, so Frazier moved on, and it doesn't shock me that he's assisting his old Buffalo buddies there that are now with the New York Giants. Buffalo is really used to having high-end defenses, and you kind of just look over the last half decade under McDermott, they average out to be about 5th in season-long schedule adjusted efficiency over that stretch. But it just feels like this side of the ball maybe takes a step back. You look at some of the quarterbacks faced last year. Buffalo went against Ryan Tannehill. Situationally, right? Kenny Pickett making his first NFL start, not the quarterback the Browns paid $230 million guaranteed to. A Patriots offense ran by a bad defensive coordinator twice. Zach Wilson, Mike White, Joe Flacco, Justin Fields, Nathan Peterman, 7th round rookie Skylar Thompson, and then Matthew Stafford, who missed most of the offseason dealing with the severe elbow issue. You think back on the betting markets, why Buffalo and under week 1 last season were both heavily steamed. And this season, you look at the schedule, right? It's Aaron Rodgers twice, Burrow, Trevor Lawrence, Jalen Hurts, Mahomes, Herbert, Dak, New England twice, right? But they decided to hire an offensive coordinator to run its offense, right? Novel concept there. And then, Sean Payton is going to improve the Broncos offense, play Miami twice, a top 5 offense when the quarterback was healthy. So we're projecting Buffalo to play a top 5 schedule of passing offenses this season. It gets a little bit more difficult. Then you think about some of the position groups and that talent that you referenced. The Bills' defensive line, I think, needs to be the catalyst. You look at Oliver. He's really never been overly dominant or played to that 9th overall pick status, but he's only 25 and he's in a contract year. I would expect his pass rush ability to look like it did in 2021. And if he pairs that with how he stopped the run last season, he's going to make a shit ton of money. So I think Ed Oliver probably has a big season. Daquan Jones really helped on the interior, was 6th in run stop win rate. He's battling a little bit of an injury. I like the Poona Ford signing for a shade over $2 million. 4 of 5 seasons, he's been a plus run stopper. And then the light finally came on for Greg Rousseau. He took that next step, 15% pressure rate on pass rush snaps. AJ Epinesa isn't an every down player. He hasn't lived up to where he was drafted, but he's a solid pass rusher. Von Miller was fantastic in 11 games. It sounds like he could return earlier than expected, and I'm not sure his production drops off a cliff, but he's 34, and this is his 4th major lower body surgery since November of 2019. Leonard Floyd was a late addition, very serviceable veteran pass rusher. If you're a Bills fan, I think you're hoping, it all comes together up front, because Buffalo plays a far better slate of offensive lines this season as well. Linebacker to me is interesting to see kind of who McDermott pairs with Matt Milano. Buffalo lives in nickel. So basically it's 2 backers on the field. That's kind of how the defense aligned last year, with 2 linebackers on the field, 95% of snaps. Matt Milano's obviously the horse, can do a little bit of everything, solid against the run, can get after the quarterback, was elite in coverage last season, but the middle linebacker position is a little bit of a concern. And I don't love paying linebackers what the Bears paid Edmonds. I would have walked away from that number as well, but he was Buffalo's green dot. And it's been a mixed bag to this point. You have Tyrell Dotson, A.J. Klein, Terrell Bernard, and then Balin Spector are the options at middle linebacker. Spector, a former 7th-round pick, has performed extremely well to this portion in camp, to the point where he's earned run with the first team. Dorian Williams, the rookie 3rd-rounder, has looked like a deer in headlights, I'm told, making the transition to the NFL. So Sean McDermott actually moved Dorian Williams from middle linebacker to the weak side and down the depth chart. So I think that middle linebacker position is a little bit of a question mark. Secondary will ultimately determine, I think, how good the Bills' defense can be with the uptick in quarterbacks that they're going to face. And I think there's some questions there and unknowns, right? Like, does Tre'Davious White return to his pre-injury form? That was a guy that was 3rd in yards per coverage snap allowed since his rookie year, but he was a replacement level player last season, returning from that ACL tear. Which guy's Buffalo getting there? Brandon Beane moved up in the 2022 draft to get Ka'ir Elam. His best 2 games came against Miami and Cincinnati to end the rookie year, but it sounds like Dane Jackson and Christian Benford are the guys that are actually battling it out for the other starting corner spot, opposite Tre'Davious White. And you kind of look at Jackson and Benford, they were just kind of average last season. Teron Johnson had the big pick against Mahomes last season, but in totality, just slightly better than replacement level as a slot corner. You love the safety tandem of Poyer and Hyde, but they're both approaching, age 33. And, this was a secondary that was picked apart last year when opposing quarterbacks released the ball under 2.5 seconds. So, there are questions about Buffalo's defensive personnel. Schedule of offenses gets tougher. You would expect defensive red zone regression. They only allowed a TD on 45% of trips. The schedule overall, right, just kind of funky. You lose a home game having to travel to London week 5. Don't get your bye until week 13. From week 11 onward, every single team but division rival New England has a win total between 9.5 and 11.5. And, most of the time it's cliche, but this is truly, I think, a make or break season for Sean McDermott. Buffalo always has a chance with Josh Allen. But I think if they're going to underachieve again, it's because the O-line doesn't improve at center, right guard, and right tackle. The defense takes a step back. And both those things happen as the schedule gets a little bit more difficult.
Yeah, you mentioned the difficulty in schedule and a couple of unique quirks or things that Buffalo is going to have to navigate through. I mean, 4 of their final 6 games are on the road, so you lose the potential weather advantage of playing in Western New York when the elements can work in your favor, and that also includes a road trip to Los Angeles against the Chargers. You look at the quarterbacks they'll face from Week 9 onwards, Payne. Joe Burrow, Russell Wilson, Aaron Rodgers, Jalen Hurts, Patrick Mahomes, Dak Prescott, Justin Herbert, Mac Jones, and Tua to close things out. So it's not exactly like you're talking about C.J. Stroud, Desmond Ridder, and Anthony Richardson to close things out when you're looking to try and secure your passage to the postseason. And the one thing, as we put a bow on Buffalo, that they haven't been able to do over the last couple of years, despite having lofty expectations and aspirations to get to the Super Bowl, they haven't been able to be the number one seed, and that stretch to close things out this year may not allow for them to be the top seed in the AFC again this year.
I think your point there about losing some of those late season home games is really astute, and I'm nearly certain we've mentioned this a couple times, so I don't feel like I'm divulging too much information here. But one thing we do with the Buffalo Bills every single year is their home field advantage actually ticks up like a quarter point later in the season, as things progress down the line because of some of those weather advantages, right? So early in the year, home games, we have one number, and then we're gradually just kind of turning the volume knob up a little bit on the value of Buffalo's home field advantage towards the latter part of the season.
When we talk about weather advantages in the AFC East, you have one end of the spectrum in the Buffalo Bills, and you have the opposite end of the spectrum in your backyard in the Miami Dolphins. And when we look at the Dolphins coming into the season, their odds to win the division find them slotted as the third favorite, right around plus 350. As far as the AFC is concerned, a shade less than 15-1. And if you shop around, you can find some 30s to win the Super Bowl. As far as the win total for the Miami Dolphins, 9.5 shaded to the under. When we look at this Dolphins team, they finished last year -7 in turnovers, yet still were able to exceed their win total with Skylar Thompson taking snaps in that Week 18 win, an 11-6 victory against the New York Jets. But they were also amongst the worst in the league in terms of penalty margin as well. The last time the Dolphins made the playoffs in back-to-back seasons, my tribesman Jay Fiedler was their starting quarterback way back when. This is a group, however, that started the year 8-2, finished games where Tua was the starting quarterback 8-3, went 1-6 when Tua wasn't able to play the full 60 minutes. Normally, Payne, we start with the offense, and there are plenty of offseason storylines around Tua and what he's doing to get himself physically ready for the season. But I feel with the Dolphins, given the injury to Jalen Ramsey, we should start on the defensive side of the ball and talk about the potential adjustments or what his absence could mean to what was going to be an improved secondary, although the strength of this Dolphins defense, at least for me, still appears to be along that defensive front.
I think if you sat a handful of real football people down and asked what were the biggest coaching hires this offseason, Vic Fangio to Miami would get mentioned multiple times. There was a real battle between Denver, Miami, and Philadelphia for Vic Fangio. And, we've been doing NFL shows. This is now season 10, if you can believe it. And I think...
Are we ever going to get a sports Emmy? I feel like we should be nominated for an award in season 10.
They don't give my kind awards.
I know they hold a grudge against Italians in this space.
You'd have a better chance.
I'll make a call. Don't worry about it. I'll make a call.
So I think, just kind of getting back on track, like when you think about Vic Fangio, I mean, it's a defensive mind that we've been raving about for years, and some of the very best offensive coaches go out of their ways, to praise him. So I think it's just a monster get for Miami. He's probably, and I don't think this is a hot take, the best modern day defensive coordinator. I think you could really say that. So just like at its very basic core, what you're going to see with the Miami Dolphins' new look defense, like far less predictable blitzes compared to Josh Boyer. I think you're going to have more multiple and disguised looks and alignments up front, which kind of, to your point, like start using that talent a little bit better up there. And then in the back, like it's going to be a lot of cover 4 and cloud coverages. And it's very much aimed to make the quarterback really think and reassess post-snap. Talent-wise, the D-line, to your point, has a ton of horses. It actually has some depth. The interesting part about this when you're doing your projection for the Dolphins defense, like most of the guys are still young enough to where they're ascending and can kind of create a new production floor and ceiling. You look at Jalen Phillips, right, made a massive leap from rookie year to sophomore season. Huge. One of the biggest in the entire NFL. 15% pressure rate on pass rush snaps. Phillips also did a very good job setting the edge. Had 42 stops on 280 run snaps. I wasn't a fan of the Bradley Chubb trade, but I mean, it is what it is at this point. He reunites with Vic Fangio. His biggest issue is health. He's solid when he can stay healthy, right? Multiple 50-plus pressure seasons. Emmanuel Ogbah, kind of the forgotten man, a nice depth piece. He might have the toughest time transitioning to the new scheme. I'm hearing they're using him more like in drop coverage as opposed to getting after the quarterback. And I think Ogba's best with his hand in the dirt, getting up the field. 127 pressures for the Dolphins in 2020 and 2021. It's why he earned, the big raise. I think you got to get Ogba back to doing that. Christian Wilkins and Zach Seiler, one of the better, meat sandwich duos in the middle there. Wilkins is the team leader, having a monster camp again. Wilkins made a tackle for the Dolphins defense on 22% of run snaps last season. Zach Seiler, probably one of the most underappreciated defensive linemen, 4 straight seasons of well above replacement level play. Linebacker group is really interesting. I mean, they are lightning fast and athletic. So you have Jerome Baker, you have David Long. To me, Baker fits Fangio's system better than the previous regime. Baker, gets asked to do things other linebackers haven't been asked to do, basically just play man coverage a lot of the time, go out on an island and defend one-on-one. David Long is one of those guys that analytics people absolutely love, blazing fast, handpicked by Fangio. If he can stay healthy, right, one of the most underappreciated linebackers in the league, top 15 backer in yards allowed per coverage snap, and graded out the 5th best run defender at linebacker as well. Secondary, to your main point, takes a blow without Jalen Ramsey. And, my understanding was because of Ramsey's physical nature and the way he embraced the slot role, that was going to be his job. He was going to be the slot corner. And last year was kind of perceived to be a down year because, he got beat a couple times deep, and that's what shows up on SportsCenter highlights. But Ramsey was actually top 15 in yards allowed per coverage snap. He graded out the 3rd best corner, only behind Sauce Gardner and Pat Surtain Jr. Xavier Howard needs to have a bounce-back season. The hope was, right, he'd be primarily on the outside with Ramsey manning the slot because Howard just isn't a slot corner. Interesting strides are being made, though, and no one would know this unless you're like a diehard Dolphins fan or getting really good information. But Cam Smith, the rookie second-rounder, has apparently flashed big time. He's thrown himself into the starting cornerback conversation. And then this is the massive shocker for any Dolphins fan. But Noah Igbenogany is also competing.
The lights
for the
finally
starting corner
clicked
spot.
for the former first-round pick out of Auburn, huh?
What a difference scheme makes because, as I said, right, Vic Fangio uses far more zone, and Igbenogany has really taken to that and has looked like a completely different player. You have some depth pieces as well. Kadar Kahu, right? Nick Needham still finding his way back from the Achilles tear. Ramsey's season isn't completely lost either, right? Kind of in that like week 12 to 14 range, he should be back. The safety group is solid with Javon Holland, Brandon Jones, who's also working his way back from an ACL tear, and then they signed Deshaun Elliott, who was brought in for depth. Elliott's played above replacement level all 4 seasons in the league. I think the Dolphins defense has a chance to make a leap. If you look at some of the metrics, right, 25th in schedule adjusted pass defense last season, 26th in EPA per pass allowed, but you have a huge upgrade in defensive mind with Vic Fangio, who specializes in coverage. The secondary was just one of the most injured groups in terms of adjusted games lost in the entire league. And at the same time, the Dolphins' schedule of offenses faced gets a little bit easier. Miami faced a top 10 schedule of offenses last season. We're projecting a below average slate this season. And, that's just, I think the defense, just based on coaching, based on scheme, what the offense is going to do for it, we're really going to see an uptick here. It's unfortunate that, probably the ceiling lowers a little bit with the loss of Ramsey, but it still should be a better defense than last year.
Well, you mentioned what the offense can do, and last year we saw them take major strides, showing drastic year-over-year improvement when it came to wide receiver separation to help a young quarterback. You saw Tua grasping some of the concepts that Coach McDaniel wanted to employ, and when he was healthy, this offense was extremely explosive in terms of hitting the big play and even down-to-down efficiency. Obviously, Tua referenced it multiple times. You read some of the articles, the comments, the quotes. He knows that the best thing that he can do for the Dolphins offense is make himself available. Bulked up a little bit this offseason. You talked about some of the unorthodox offseason training methods that the Dolphins were going to push on him. And Tua's been pretty outspoken about jiu-jitsu, learning how to fall, doing some of the things that he thinks can work in the right direction. And one of his quotes I found really interesting. He says, "Everything that I did this offseason entailed what would keep me on the field for the entirety of the season," where he talked about that weight gain. He talked about surviving the brutality of an 18-week NFL regular season. So we can start with the quarterback, where Tua last year finished with an EPA that put him only behind the elite of the elite in Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen, and a wide receiver group that may not have a ton of depth, but has two bona fide number ones when healthy in Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle.
We've bet a lot of football futures the last 2 decades, Todd. And, boy, the Miami Dolphins win total last season might have been the most annoying winner.
City.
Oh, that was one of the most annoying winners we've been a part of. But, you kind of look back a year later. What a great bet over 8.5 wins was, especially when you kind of assess the current market, right? Much tougher AFC landscape, the public narrative surrounding Tua's health. And the Dolphins' win total is set a full game higher this season. And, we'll touch on this briefly because I think it's lazy coverage and, quite frankly, it's a game of pin the tail on the donkey blindfolded. Of all the teams that have real aspirations, right, potential Super Bowl caliber teams, if the starting quarterback went down with a season-ending injury, those teams aren't competing, right? You could say it about Joe Burrow and the Bengals, and boy, they just had a serious scare last week, right? Josh Allen and the Bills, Mahomes, Herbert, Rodgers, any of those quarterbacks go down, that team season is over. So having the conversation of if Tua goes down, the Dolphins are done just seems so obvious. Yeah.
You love the caveat people place on that. The only team that doesn't miss a beat when their quarterback goes down appears to be the San Francisco 49ers.
Yes, I mean that is the one team. You are spot on there. What Kyle Shanahan does with the quarterback position is unreal. So you mentioned jiu-jitsu, and that was something we suggested last year in season on this podcast. Who has embraced it? Take a karate class, learn how to fall. And in February, outlets started reporting that Tua was taking a Japanese martial arts to learn how to fall, right? Tucking the chin to the chest on the way down, bulking up, as you mentioned. And here's what we know about Tua. We called for massive improvement last season. We got it. I mean, the Dolphins were 8-3 in games Tua started and finished. Tua only trailed Patrick Mahomes in EPA plus completion percentage over expectation among 32 qualifying quarterbacks with 300 snaps. When Tua was on the field, the Dolphins' EPA per dropback improved positive 0.35 points. Dropback success rate was 8% higher with Tua. You look at the first 12 weeks last season, Miami was number 1 in schedule-adjusted pass efficiency. Tua was number 1 in EPA per play by a long mile the first 12 weeks. And word out of Dolphin camp is the ball is simply not hitting the ground through 7 practices. Tua's had that much precision. You think about kind of the correlation to keeping Tua healthy, not just what he's done with his body and what he's done with the karate class, but the O-line, right? That unit needs to be better. Finished 24th in pass block win rate last season. If not for Tua releasing the ball in 2.5 seconds on average, that was one of the 5 fastest rates among qualifying quarterbacks. The pressure rate allowed by the Dolphins would have been much higher than 27%. But here's what's exciting. We knew when the Dolphins drafted Austin Jackson, right? He was only 20. He was undersized. I know you're familiar with him because you watch a lot of USC football. The light has apparently turned on, and he has been very good in camp, was the word that I got. Austin is taking that next step. Robert Hunt has been the best lineman in camp thus far, stacking a great camp on top of his best season as a pro in 2022. Connor Williams moved to center last season when the Dolphins signed him. It was his really first time in the NFL playing the position full time. It was a new position for him, right? Just getting acclimated. I'm told Connor Williams' snap issues have subsided, and we know how Williams performed as a blocker last season. Elite run blocker, solid pass protector. The O-line has made strides in camp despite their best in Teron Armstead not practicing yet. He should be good to go for the start of the season. Elite left tackle when healthy. Left guard is where the glaring hole for Miami is, right? Liam Eichenberg hasn't shown an ability to play at this level through 2 seasons, no matter where the Dolphins move him. It would be really interesting to see if Isaiah Wynn gets moved to left guard. It was something Belichick did in week 6 of the 2020 season, because if so, and Wynn returns to his first 3 seasons form, the Dolphins have a chance to be one of the most improved O-lines in the league if it's Armstead, Wynn, Williams, Hunt, and Jackson. We know about the weapons, right? Tyreek and Waddle, probably the most electric game-breaking duo. Elite receivers that create separation, to your point at the top, can run after the catch. Tyreek Hill, right? 3.1 yards per route run. Assuredly breaks the season-long receiving yards record if Tua doesn't miss time. Waddle, 2.5 yards per route run. Braxton Berrios, returns to Miami. Solid slot receiver and route runner that I imagine sees a ton of space underneath with Waddle and Tyreek kind of pulling everyone downfield. Berrios, by the way, absolutely slaying it off the field as well. You still have
if it's anything like Josh Allen, that could create problems in the locker room and his on-field focus. So got to get him dialed back in.
You still have speedster, right? In Cedric Wilson. You signed another speedster in Robbie Anderson, who's apparently going by Chosen Anderson. I don't know if you can do that with that type of production, but here we are. Mike McDaniel has openly said he wants the fastest offense in football, and he's gone out of his way to build that. If there are deficiencies on offense, short yardage situations have to improve. Dolphins were 18th in short yardage rushing success rate, 30th in power success. I am hearing, again, more Alex Ingold this season in those situations. Miami's tight end group is pretty uninspiring. I don't think their younger tight ends are quite ready to contribute yet. We'll see. The Dolphins also play a very difficult schedule of defenses, right now projected to be one of the 5 toughest. And the glaring difference year over year, a huge leap in explosive play defenses. I think, though, kind of what evens that out is Tua helping, turn down the turnover rate. Miami was bottom 5 in the NFL and lost EPA to turnovers. Most of that came from Bridgewater and Skylar Thompson playing. And the Dolphins are also used to playing a difficult schedule, played the second toughest slate of defenses last season. So I think the ceiling here is pretty high for Miami. Todd, it's obviously not widely available, so we could never give it out as an official investment. But if you have access to alternative win totals, alt win totals, which a lot of people do, the Dolphins over 8.5 minus 160 is a very solid bet. Every listener right now, and even us, everyone with a microphone in front of their face, has made far worse bets in their lifetime than Dolphins over 8.5 minus 160. So if you can find that in the alternative market, probably worth a few shekels.
I've lost my focus now. When you mentioned Braxton Berrios, I had to pop in a quick Google search and see who he's been tied to this offseason. And I know you are a massive presence, which a lot of our listeners don't know on TikTok, so I figured you would definitely know the girl he's been attending music festivals with and everything else. And I'm sure what's made public is only a part of the story, knowing what the scene is like down there in South Florida. So good for Braxton Berrios off the field. We'll see if he can produce as a number 3 with plenty of opportunity in that Dolphins offense, and a team that I think will be really interesting to watch, knowing how they're going to be priced week in, week out, and a fascinating matchup right out of the gates when they'll travel out to the West Coast against the Chargers team that completely stymied everything that they wanted to do offensively. We'll see if Coach McDaniel's been planning all offseason to make some of those necessary adjustments. When we look at the other 2 teams in the AFC, we'll get there in a moment, but want to remind all of our loyal listeners to follow Payne. I guess it's X, not Twitter anymore. I'll have to get used to saying @Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there for all things Bet the Board. Follow the podcast @BetTheBoardPod. And if you haven't already subscribed to the Bet the Board podcast newsletter, do so. Some additional best bets that you're going to get throughout the course of the season, largely focused on the prop market. It's reminders about all the work that we're doing across all sports at the Bet the Board home offices right to your inbox every Friday during the fall. Take full advantage of that. Takes about 5 seconds to sign up, and your bankroll will thank you later. When we look at the New England Patriots, Payne, this is a team who is a long shot to win the division, right around 9-1. Bigger long shots in the AFC at a price north of 35 and outside of 70-1 to win the Lombardi Trophy. Lowest win total in the division by 2 full games at 7.5, shaded to the under at a lot of shops. But you kind of mentioned it towards the top when you look at New England. The biggest move they made this offseason may be having brought in an adult to lead their offense and an offensive coordinator, Bill O'Brien, that's got experience calling plays and such. But they'll play a very difficult schedule of opposing pass defenses after a schedule that was somewhat favorable last year. And I found it interesting what Louis Riddick had to say about Bill O'Brien maybe being the most important coordinator hire in the NFL for the 2023 season, having to get Mac Jones and the New England offense on the right track after what he described as an utterly embarrassing train wreck in 2022. This was a Patriots franchise that went on a spending spree in free agency back in 2021 to the tune of nearly $300 million. Over the last 2 offseasons, they combined to spend just $128 million. And this Payne was an offense under Matt Patricia's leadership that was a downright disaster last year. The only way they can go is up, but do they have the right pieces to make strides when you look at the receiver room, you look at the limited depth you have in the backfield, and still plenty of questions swirling about their pivot and a man under center in Mac Jones?
Yeah, we saw this coming, right? I mean, New England had made the playoffs 17 times in the last 19 seasons prior to last year, and one of our preview best bets was New England to miss the playoffs. And if you go back and listen, which I did earlier this week, we made it crystal clear the Patriots offense wasn't going to be good. And when you go out of your way to hire a bad to poor defensive coordinator and make him your OC, probably one of the worst decisions Belichick has ever made in New England. And no surprise, right? The Patriots offense went on to finish 26th in schedule adjusted efficiency. They only survived because of explosive plays. And Mac Jones clearly regressed under Matt Patricia. I feel terrible for him, honestly. And as a rookie, you look at Mac Jones and you saw promise. He finished 11th in EPA plus completion percentage over expectation among quarterbacks with at least 300 snaps. That dipped to 29th last season. And, I get it. Mac Jones might not be the most talented. He might not have the highest ceiling of a quarterback, but he's uber smart. He knew things were wrong. He voiced his opinion, and it caused contention with him and Belichick. But it was obvious, right? And you just kind of forget the lack of efficiency for a minute. New England struggled to even line up, struggled to get plays in on time. The Patriots led the league in regular season delay of game penalties because it was that bad for Matt Patricia. And you said it perfectly. It was the best line, right? There's at least an adult in the room this year. And we haven't always thought highly of Bill O'Brien, and you know that if you're a loyal listener, but that was mostly his personnel decisions once Houston made him GM in addition to head coach. If you listen to quotes this offseason from Patriots defenders, they claim to be getting more work in because the offense Bill O'Brien is installing has much more variety. Adrian Phillips came out and said, we never see the same thing twice. And so it's a good sign that at least Mac Jones in this offense has a fighting chance this year. I think New England's offense likely improves. It's not going to be an elite offense, though. Average would be a nice leap, right? Get to average. The parts still aren't great, to your point, and you hit it perfectly. It's like Belichick decided to reset the tight end market in 2021, and he spent $87.5 million on Jonnu Smith and Hunter Henry, and then he ponied up $22 million for Nelson Aguilar. So there are some cap restraints still because of that. I would assume, right, just looking at the data, if I was Bill O'Brien, he's looking at Mac Jones, he's seeing what he does well on film, he's comparing it to the data. Throw with more play action. I mean, Mac's splits with and without play action are substantial, and somehow Patricia only had Mac throw with play action on 16% of snaps last season, one of the lowest rates in the league. Mac Jones also needs a stable pocket. His splits with and without pressure are dramatic. Last season alone, Mac's passing grade dipped 64 points when pressured. Out of 40 qualifying quarterbacks, Mac Jones was the 5th best passer when kept clean, 38th when pressured. So, I mean, New England projects to face a top 10 schedule of pass rushing defenses. You need the guys up front to be good this year. Trent Brown needs to be better at left tackle, gave up 39 pressures and had 14 penalties last season. Cole Strange played like a rookie, flashed in some spots, wasn't playable in others. Let's see if Cole Strange kind of evens out those performances. David Andrews is a solid center. Mike Onwenu might be the best of the bunch at right guard. Have to monitor that injury situation. He's on the PUP list right now. Would be a huge loss if he's not ready for the start of the season. Everyone seems to pencil Riley Reif in at right tackle. I'm hearing something different internally over there. Connor McDermott has the inside track to start at right tackle. We'll see if that comes to fruition. Looks like Ramondre Stevenson's backfield, but he did wear down the second half of last season. You hit it perfectly, Todd. They're looking for some depth pieces, right? I mean, Ramondre Stevens is fantastic. He's a brute. He can catch the ball out of the backfield. He just runs physically and violently. Averaged 3.8 yards per rush after first contact, but it sounds like, can't even say this out loud, at the right price, they're looking to sign Zeke. He was
in camp, baby. He was out there showboating, belly shirts and all up there in New England.
So, we're not calling for massive improvement, but I think we're going to see something a little bit better here. You have a decent pass-catching group. There's at least some options. Not a lot of separation to be had, which isn't a great mesh with Mac Jones because he's a quarterback that likes to win pre-snap and then get the ball out quick post-snap. Tough to get the ball out quick without receiver separation. New England lost its best in Jacoby Myers. Juju replaces him. tiny downgrade. Gesicki and Devontae Parker, are contested catch guys, not space creators. So you look at Parker's career average, 1.6 yards per route run, Gesicki 1.3. Tyquan Thornton was a second-round pick in the 2022 draft, wasn't good as a rookie. To this point, hasn't flashed in camp at all. He's been moved down the depth chart. Kendrick Bourne still around, replacement-level player. The guy that I'm hearing is Demario Douglas. He's been the one pass catcher to flash in camp along with Hunter Henry, but this just feels like, a collection of wide receiver 3s and 4s. When I look at the Patriots offense in totality, I think multiple things can be true, right? That Bill O'Brien is a massive upgrade at OC and Mac Jones shows better this season, but the talent isn't there, and that creates a really low ceiling. You couple that with the Patriots offense projected to face a top 5 overall schedule of defenses in a loaded AFC East and AFC overall, and you can see why the win total is set at 7.5, and it's trending downwards despite Belichick. You think about him, right? Winning more than 7 games in 21 of 23 seasons in New England, and yet this win total's there's money coming in under on this at 7.5.
There's no Troy Brown or Randy Moss walking through that door anytime soon to create separation on the outside or allow Mac Jones to have a game-breaking wide receiver. One of the areas, though, when you look at New England's sustained success under Bill Belichick is because of what they do on the defensive side of the ball. You can make the argument that the group still lacks a truly elite edge rusher when it comes to being able to generate pressure in the NFL water market at 2.5 seconds. They're talking about increased emphasis throughout Patriots camp about a positionless defense, trying to do some things to disguise coverages, put players in unique spots that can confuse opposing quarterbacks. But Payne, when I look at the schedule for what New England's going to face, going to be a lot tougher to confuse this schedule of opposing quarterbacks than what they encountered last year. And while the secondary was a reason for optimism, you look at some of the individual grades given to players out there, and maybe I'm in the minority, but I'm not nearly as bullish on this defense being as good as what some of the numbers suggested a season ago.
Well, I think you're directionally right in both ways, right? Like Belichick's defenses are typically greater than the sum of their parts. You know what I'm saying? Like that versatility, the schemes that he uses, having guys who can play multiple positions, it's all part of like the trickery that you have to prepare for each week. And he's going to show you something different every single week. So you have defenses that might not have the greatest names, but you look at the end of the year, right? Back-to-back top 5 finishes in schedule-adjusted efficiency the last 2 seasons. You mentioned the schedule, right? And New England faces a much tougher schedule of offenses this year. We're projecting a top 5 schedule, and within that, a far more explosive schedule of offenses. And explosive plays truly matter in swing games, right? We know that. Explosive plays are huge. The quarterbacks New England faces are substantially better. Last season, the Patriots played Trubisky, Brissett, Sam Ehlinger, Zach Wilson twice, Colt McCoy, Bridgewater, and Skylar Thompson. And for us, in the 17 regular season games this season, New England faces 14 offenses. We project to either be top 10 or have a stock arrow up over last season. And it's why New England's a favorite, just 4 times all season, only twice by 3 or more points. And that's the reality of this. It's like you can be improved on offense, but everyone else around you got better too, And there's some decent parts to the defense. A couple young guys that started to ascend last year. You see the light come on for Josh Uche, 20% pressure rate on pass rush snaps, 56 total pressures. Uche had 31 combined his first 2 seasons. Jawan Bentley embraced, his thumper role, had a 13% run stop rate. Solid tackler, improved in coverage. Kyle Duggar had his best season in year 3. You have Jelani Tavai had his best season in the NFL and was a force in coverage and tackled extremely well. 0% missed tackle rate last season for Tavai. Christian Barmore's final 5 games were damn good, and his final 2 against Miami and Buffalo were elite. If that's the Barmore New England gets this season, he's going to have a chance to be one of the better interior linemen in the NFL. New England still has, veteran presences in the front 7 with Judon and Dietrich Wise. They combined for 125 pressures and a 13% pressure rate on pass rush snaps last season. The secondary is Belichick's forte, right? That's what he coaches. I think it's a decent mix of veterans and young guys. Jack Jones was the best of the bunch, top 25 in adjusted yards allowed per coverage snap. Jonathan Jones has been the best player in camp so far. Patriots need Marcus Jones to return to his 2020 form, and then you have the 17th overall pick, and Christian Gonzalez apparently has had a dream start to camp. At safety, Adrian Phillips, back-to-back solid seasons. Jalen Mills making that move back to a full-time safety. Let's see how that transition goes. He's played it in earlier parts of his career. And if you're following closely, third-round rookie, Marde Mapu, getting substantial starter reps at linebacker, slot, and free safety in camp. So all signs point to Mapu, kind of the Swiss Army knife type, which, again, you know Belichick loves because his goal is to be multiple week to week and kind of positionalist, and he wants to change things even possession to possession. I like New England's defense again, right? Like, no surprise. It's run by Belichick. But the schedule is an absolute bear. We saw New England feast on bad offenses and struggle against good ones for the most part last season. I think you still probably have to project a top 10 New England defense. That's what we're doing. But a lot of the guys had career years last season. And so is that going to be the new normal, or is regression ahead? You can't have regression as the schedule difficulty enhances this much, or else you're going to see a defense probably, not going to have a chance to be a top 5 unit like they've been the last 2 years.
If there's a silver lining for the Patriots in terms of their schedule, unless I misread things and assessed incorrectly, they don't play a single team coming off a bye week, which should help for Bill Belichick to devise some unique wrinkles. But I think a lot of that that we've talked about is offset by playing veteran quarterbacks instead of a lot of neophytes at the position like we described last year, where the New England defense was able to fatten up a little bit. And clearly a team that professional bettors, as you mentioned, are not buying with the win total trending under, despite being set at 7.5. When we look at the landscape of the AFC East, there's obviously one team that may not be as polarizing amongst professional bettors, but it's definitely grabbed headlines as far as mainstream media is concerned. And that, of course, would be the last team on our docket to break down, being the New York Jets, whose big offseason move was acquiring the face of the franchise in Aaron Rodgers, who's trying to change the culture for an organization looking to end a 12-year postseason drought. When we look at the Jets' numbers for the season, they are second favorites in the AFC East at a price just shy of 5-2. Their odds to win the AFC haven't really moved much since Rodgers was acquired at a price less than 10-1, and they find themselves in that 15 to 16-1 range as far as the Super Bowl prospects. Their win total, 9.5, held pretty strong, shaded to the over depending on where you shop. And this was a group Payne that started last season 7-4, but went on to lose their final 6 games and miss the playoffs, largely because of erratic quarterback play. But the defense, while strong in the counting metrics, didn't force turnovers at the kind of rate that you'd like to see from an elite stop unit. The Jets, however, are just 34-80 as a franchise since 2016. It's actually the league's worst record during that span, and they've put together one winning season since 2011. And when you read some of the comments and quotes coming out of Jets camp, Robert Saleh said, "You're not trying to build a team of names. You want to make sure that it fits." I feel like that's what we've been able to do a really good job of, not trying to build a dream team. Don't tell Dalvin Cook that, but making sure that everything fits for a reason. There's a purpose for what we're doing. This was an offense held without a touchdown in their final 3 games last year, averaged just more than 17.4 points per game, which was good enough for 29th in the league. The numbers are staggering, Payne, not just what the Jets didn't do offensively last year, but how poor they've been for a lot longer stretch than that. Is there legitimate reason for Jets fans to be optimistic with an aging Aaron Rodgers taking over this attack?
You let us in with aging Aaron Rodgers. I kind of want to approach this a little bit differently, but for me, like, the Jets are one of the toughest teams to peg because there's a lot of guys I respect that are yelling overvalued, right? Too much hype. And typically,
we did some of that with the Patriots, by the way, with the Buccaneers when they brought in Tom Brady. Oh, the market's overreacted to an aging quarterback coming in there to change the culture. We know how that ended.
And I've heard that from multiple people that are selling the Jets this year, that like, oh, there was this transition for Tom Brady. Well, true, because he was going to a brand new system with a brand new voice. Nathaniel Hackett has been with Aaron Rodgers for multiple years. It's not a new voice. I know we all think of these guys, right, with analytics and metrics that we provide everyone, right, that these guys are robots, but they're also humans, right? Relationships do matter. And so, like, that relationship has already been forged. So it's like all the guys that are yelling overvalued, too much hype, like, I kind of, have some reservations there. And again, like I usually stay away from teams that are clearly improved but are garnering a ton of buzz because it becomes difficult figuring out how large the improvement is relative to new market price. And so, most of the buzz surrounding Aaron Rodgers is like all of these different opinions of how you value this version of Aaron Rodgers turning 40 in December. And it's obvious, right? Like Aaron Rodgers isn't in his prime. But I also think last season was a bit of a negative outlier, right? I mean, he was just like back-to-back MVPs like before that, right? And I think...
And the one thing, too, in Rodgers, we wrote Rodgers off for dead years ago before he had those back-to-back MVP seasons. We thought he was at the end of his rope.
I think if we're having meaningful, unbiased conversation, Aaron Rodgers projects somewhere between quarterback 4 and 10. And I understand that delta is very large because that puts you either on like the back end of tier 1 or it kind of puts you in the middle of like tier 2. And we did a back of the napkin math exercise in May. And since that time, my numbers have adjusted just a little bit of a tick, right? The way Aaron Rodgers has started his time in New York is very positive, and that was one of our questions, right? The perceived me guy just took a $35 million pay cut. Aaron Rodgers just went to war for his OC and fired back at Sean Payton. And Rodgers has immediately built a great rapport with Garrett Wilson day one. So combing over more data along with some of the manual adjustments, right? We had Zach Wilson 3 points worse than an average quarterback last season. He finished 38th in EPA. We're starting Aaron Rodgers 4 points better than an average quarterback. Effectively, it's a 7-point upgrade. 17-game season, that's 119 points. Roughly every 34 points is worth a win. So that's a 3.5-game improvement. And then you look at the win totals. Last year, the Jets closed 5.8. We're looking at 9.6 this season. So, like, the Jets, by our loose math, are overvalued by about a shade less than a third of a win. And I think our projection from Wilson to Aaron Rodgers is pretty conservative. I mean, we're talking about the NFL's worst quarterback situation over the last decade of any team. Last year alone, the Jets had the largest delta in the league between offensive and defensive performance. And there's other data points, right, that suggest the Jets might not be that overrated, right? Of all the NFL lines right now, week 1 through 18, at this stage, week 1 is both the most liquid and theoretically the most accurate. And in the very first game of the season, when Aaron Rodgers is acclimating to so many new things, that's when pro bettors decided, hey, I'm going to tie my money up for 4 months and bet the Jets +3 against the Bills. And that's why we're down to Bills -1. So probably like a very long-winded way of saying I think it's lazy if you're trying to accurately assess the Jets and your largest talking point is overrated. So, Todd, let's like somewhat quickly go over the pieces on the Jets offense surrounding Aaron Rodgers to kind of complete the offensive breakdown, but I'll let you kind of regather us because I went left field and lead us to where we want to go here.
I actually think
I just thought that was more of like a high-level conversation. And
I honestly think,
but obviously we want to talk about some of the pieces.
That's the most important way to look at it, though, because we're talking about things from a macro vantage point more so than the minutia of week to week. And you mentioned the week 1 number. We saw one prominent shop open at 3. A lot of others opened at 1, and we've kind of held strong with that particular price point. We look at the quarterback position. That's only part of the dynamic that we'll see in play. As far as this Jets offense is concerned, they do have some difference makers. Garrett Wilson was named the Offensive Rookie of the Year, clearly emerged as the team's top receiving threat. You talk about a level of familiarity. What do the Jets do? They bring in Allen Lazard and Randall Cobb to help with Aaron Rodgers implement the offensive strengths that we're going to see here. Corey Davis remains on the roster. We'll figure out what we're going to get there. I think the biggest question marks that we have for the Jets is what this backfield and the offensive line are going to look like. Breece Hall averaged nearly 6 yards per carry before tearing his ACL. Should return to lead back status. When he gets back in the fold remains anybody's best guess. Even being young, healthy, and explosive, he may not look like that same back that we saw when he started to grasp what he was capable of doing in the NFL. He's going to benefit immensely as well as any other backs the Jets have there, knowing that they're not going to run into the same loaded boxes that they did a season ago with Zach Wilson. But for the Jets, regardless of who their quarterback was going to be, the one position that had a lot of questions was an offensive line where Jets left tackles were essentially matadors, allowing pressure rates which ranked barely inside the top 30. It's an offensive line group that has more questions than answers when you look at an aging Dwayne Brown returning from an injury. Mekhi Becton hasn't been able to scratch the surface of what he's capable of doing, at least when he was drafted, but it is also a group that only allowed, and I say only, 42 sacks, which had them in the top half of the league, mainly because Zach Wilson ran around with like a chicken with his head cut off back there. So we can start with the building blocks up front. Is this an offensive line that's going to be able to protect Aaron Rodgers, knowing mobility isn't on the side of Father Time?
Yeah, if there was a unit that would cause, the Jets offense to underachieve, it's clearly the O-line. Dwayne Brown certainly past his prime. I still think he's a good pass blocker. He's recovering from surgery and, hasn't participated in camp yet, but I think the Jets are hopeful he'll be the starting left tackle. Mekhi Becton already missing time with a knee injury. Laken Tomlinson is pegged at left guard. He's coming off his worst season as a pro, so hopefully some positive regression there. Connor McGovern, the other one, has played well above replacement level as a center. He's being pushed by a rookie in Joe Tippmann. Elijah Vera Tucker really flashed in his sophomore season before injury. I think he's probably the stalwart of the unit. Billy Turner has the inside track at right tackle. If you look at Turner's best 2 seasons, they were under Nathaniel Hackett in Green Bay. I think there's options for the Jets O-line, especially if healthy. As a whole, the Jets were the 4th most injured offense last season, one of the most injured offensive lines. You'd project positive regression there and hope the health improves, along the O-line that was, bottom third of the league in both pressure rate allowed and pass block win rate. I think you mentioned some of the other weapons. The running back room should be above league average if Breece Hall returns to form post-ACL. I think the ceiling becomes much higher for that group. You look like you kind of hinted, right? Like through 7 games, Hall was really elusive, averaged 4.1 yards after first contact. He forced a 20% missed tackle rate. Michael Carter couldn't play any worse than last year. If he returns to his rookie form, that would be huge. Just, dreadful last year. And then they went out in the 5th round and got a 4.4 speed guy in Abercrombie from Pittsburgh. Still have Bam Knight. And then the word is the Jets are kicking the tires on Dalvin Cook. We'll see if that comes to fruition. Receiver group led by Garrett Wilson. It just feels like Wilson and Rodgers are the perfect marriage. If you look last year, Aaron Rodgers' on-target throw rate was actually better than in 2021 when he won the MVP. Rodgers, had receivers drop 40 passes last year. And then you think about the correlation of Garrett Wilson. Only 61% of his targets were deemed catchable. So like that combination, like those two guys are going to be loving each other, right? Then you mentioned Lazard coming over from Green Bay, above replacement level receiver. McCole Hardman has, a trait that simply can't be taught, right? Like speed kills. And Hardman's versatile, and supposedly the route tree has grown this offseason. Corey Davis, I think, absolutely makes this roster, especially once they got rid of Mims. He's kind of established himself, a floor of being average. So the pass catching options are deep. Conklin, was second on the team in targets from a tight end position and dealt with the highest rate of uncatchable passes thrown his way among all qualifying tight ends as well. I anticipate this offense being dramatically better, and my vibe here is that, a better offense is going to help the defense as well, because some of those parts on that unit, a little bit scary. I heard what you said at the top there with Salah saying, he's looking for compatible pieces and not necessarily trying to assemble an all-star team. But I think that's actually where maybe some of the question marks are.
Well, I mean, look, if this offense improves and they can get their defensive counterparts to just maintain the level they played at last year, obviously you can understand why Jets fans are excited about playing meaningful football past the flip of the calendar into 2024, because it's a stop unit last year that finished number 2 in points per game allowed and number 4 in total defense. And when you look at the defensive efficiency number, they jumped from 32nd in the league to 6th. Defense, though, projected to play a very difficult schedule. We'll get into some of those metrics from your standpoint in a moment. There's a good amount of pass rushing options that are capable of generating pressure off the edge or even from the interior. When you look at some of the personnel that they have there, from a linebacking position, C.J. Mosley logged 158 tackles, 10 run stuffs on his way to a second-team All-Pro season. Quincy Williams, a little bit underrated as far as casual fans are concerned, and the value he lends there. But the strength of this Jets defense clearly was in its defensive backfield, where Sauce Gardner finished number 1 in yards allowed per coverage snap. and wins Defensive Rookie of the Year. DJ Reed was outstanding. Michael Carter, the other one, did what was expected of him and then some in terms of his performance from the slot. And then when you look at try and figure out what they're going to get at the safety position, you can understand why if the Jets are going to be successful, it starts with the defense, but hopefully they have an offense that can carry their fair share of the responsibility should this team get to the double-digit win threshold.
Yeah, I mean, just what a difference a year makes. The Jets went from dead last 32nd in schedule-adjusted defensive efficiency in Robert Saleh's first year to 6th in year 2, and that was against, the toughest schedule of offenses in the league. I think we knew Saleh's pedigree, but the biggest thing for me is you could tell Saleh grew up as a leader, and maybe that got passed to Joe Douglas and then passed down, but like the first time you do something, right, you don't know what you don't know. So all of like the ridiculous sideline antics really waned in year 2, right? That was maturity that was great to see. Unfortunately, like the Jets don't catch a break with the schedule again. We're projecting New York to face the toughest schedule of offenses for the second straight season. All of the regression luck metrics should probably even out, and I think it's good to talk about them, not just the ones that, support biases, right? Like, for instance, like the Jets were the healthiest defense in the NFL. But the Jets also spent the third most time on the field, and its offense, continually put the defense in bad spots. Now you have Aaron Rodgers coming to town, right? The Jets offense will likely possess it longer, will build more leads, and will likely turn it over less, knowing Aaron Rodgers' interception rate the last 5 seasons is just 1.2%. The Jets also had the worst fumble luck in the NFL. So, maybe those things even out the health, right? Talent-wise, Quinnen Williams, as good as it gets on the inside. Hopefully the new $96 million deal doesn't cause complacency. But you look at his numbers, right? 12% pressure rate on pass rush snaps, from the interior is just a monster number. He's a beast. I kind of question the rest of the Jets' interior defensive line. Al Woods is 36th, 6th team in 13 seasons. Has 3 of his best seasons the last 3 years, but, he's just an old guy. And Solomon Thomas, right, was the 3rd overall pick in 2017. He's never even played to replacement level in 6 seasons. Quentin Jefferson, now in year 8. Only one of those seasons has Jefferson played to replacement level. And so it makes me a little bit nervous if you get just a touch of decline from Quinnen Williams and those are your other 3 helpers on the interior. Like, I'm not sure what you have there. I like the talent on the edge. John Franklin Myers has improved each of his first 4 seasons, 14% pressure rate on pass rush snaps. You also look at him, he has an ability to set the edge as well. Carl Lawson, another year removed from the Achilles tear. If he can get back to the 2020 form, that'd be massive. Jermaine Johnson played over 300 snaps as a rookie. Played those snaps in total as an above replacement level player, so hopefully he grows and ascends. Michael Clemens, right, had a huge rookie year, played over 300 snaps at a great level. Bryce Huff is a situational pass rusher, made a huge leap in year 3, 21% pressure rate on pass rush snaps. The defensive end group is going to come in waves at the quarterback. It's just the interior, right, past Quinnen Williams that leaves me a little bit uncomfortable. Linebacker group has question marks. C.J. Mosley returned close to his Baltimore form, played all 17 games last season. It's essentially, a contract year for Mosley since the Jets have a team option and can save $11 million if they cut him ahead of next year. So hopefully, the Jets get that contract year boost in terms of play for Mosley. Quincy Williams is in year 5. Maybe Robert Saleh is saying all the nice things about being a glue guy. To me, he's a liability. Well below replacement level player every single year of his career. Jamian Sherwood enters year 3, only played 164 total snaps at the NFL level. 5th round guy, so the pedigree isn't necessarily there. I just think we're kind of guessing as to what he could be. Elite corner tandem with Sauce Gardner and DJ Reed. Gardner, number 1 in the NFL in yards allowed per coverage snap among qualifying corners. Only allowed 45% of targets to be caught. But again, the question becomes, when you're the number 1 corner last year, you can be great again this year. Cornerback play typically has variance year to year. You can only go in one direction from number 1. So you just wonder if that play trails off just a touch. DJ Reed finished 6th in yards per coverage snap allowed, only allowed 56% of targets to be caught. Michael Carter did a great job locking down the slot, was good in both coverage and against the run. The safety position, right? You kind of hinted at this, Todd, a little bit nerve-wracking, right? Jordan Whitehead recorded 1 positive game grade from week 11 onward last season, has always had issues as a tackler. Solid in coverage, though. Tony Adams is being, or was thought to be being, right, like thrust into a starting role, was a free agent rookie last year, was good against the run in limited snaps. You know it's a position of concern because the Jets went out and they signed Adrian Amos in the last week. And I think he probably, my gut says he ends up being the starter there. Amos was really dominant from 16 to 2021. He had that huge stretch as one of the league's better safeties, so maybe that's a big help. Overall, we're projecting the Jets to have another good defense somewhere in that 10 range, but aside from edge rushers, it just feels like the defense is very thin and lacks depth virtually everywhere else. If one or two key guys were to go down, we could be looking at a larger dip than expected. And I know, when we talk about injury, sure, if guys go down, right, most teams will struggle. But defense, right, it's just you're being contacted on every single play. You're just more apt to injury there than say, a quarterback. But I think Salah's going to have a good defense. I just think they take a step back.
Last thing on the Jets, when you look at the schedule, obviously with a lot of optimism, we know New York can be a very difficult market to play in. The schedule makers wanted the Jets to be able to showcase one of their shiny new toys early on, and we'll see the Jets on the first Monday Night Football game of the season against the Buffalo Bills. They have an early bye week, which can be a blessing and a curse, coming week 7. But the first 6 weeks of the season, Bills at the Cowboys, home against the Patriots, a team that they've lost to 178 games in a row, or so it feels like. Home against the Chiefs, at the Broncos, which obviously is getting all sorts of buzz given the war words between Sean Payton, Nathaniel Hackett, and Aaron Rodgers that you mentioned, and a home game against the Eagles. I mean, it feels like we're going to get a pretty good indication of exactly who the Jets are going to be after just 6 weeks of football.
I think all the guys screaming overhyped will probably feel somewhat vindicated the first 6 weeks, and at that point, heading into that week 7 bye is probably, if the Jets were to start slow, is probably when you start finding some value as a bettor.
It's all about identifying opportunities and times to jump into the market. We know the NFL falls victim as far as the week-to-week pricing to public perception as much as anything else, and some teams you have a great read on before the season starts. Others you kind of take a wait-and-see approach to. 4 teams broken down as eloquently as we know how to do around these parts, but before we get into the best bet portion of the program, we would be remiss if we didn't bring on another member of our NFL team. Dr. Deepak Shona will join us for yet a second season. Was a huge get for us last year. Added those injury updates, not just to help bettors create perspective, but also fantasy players every Monday throughout the season. You can follow Deepak on Twitter at SportMDAnalysis, and he previews some of the biggest injuries to look for as far as preseason camp is concerned.
Are you injured or are you hurt?
When injuries occur in the NFL, you need someone to call on.
If you're hurt, you can still play. If you're injured, you can't.
Let's check in with Dr. Deepak Chona, Stanford and Harvard-trained orthopedic sports surgeon and founder of Sports Med Analytics, the industry leader in data-driven injury analysis.
So are you hurt or are you injured?
Thanks for that intro, guys. Pumped to be joining you again this off-season and all season long. Tons of injuries in the AFC East, so let's dive in, starting with Jalen Ramsey. The average return timeline after a meniscus repair is about 4 to 6 months, but Ramsey's 90th percentile athletic metrics qualify him for that elite category who tend to return quickly. So our data is predicting Jalen Ramsey returning at about 4 months after surgery, or in other words, late November, early December. Position players tend to return at their pre-injury level of production, so we aren't really anticipating much performance dip when Ramsey does return. And then the biggest question of the offseason for fantasy owners, Breece Hall. Young running backs tend to average about 10 months post-ACL. That's right around where Hall will be by the start of week 1. Most running backs do see a short-term dip in their productivity when they first return, and that period usually ends around 18 months, but there's a lot of variability. From our database, we've learned that age, draft position, and pre-injury athleticism are each meaningful predictors of the severity and duration of that post-ACL dip. In Hall's case, he's young, 21 at the time of surgery, really elite as an athlete with 95th percentile combine metrics, and he was drafted high, 36th overall for a running back, straight out of college. Together, this makes for pretty much as favorable an outcome as possible. We have seen top running backs bounce back quickly before, and Breece Hall does fit the analytics mold for the type of player that does it. Now, one thing to keep in mind, though, is that young running backs off of knee surgery do tend to average 3 to 4 games to ramp up their touches. So we temper the early season expectations here, but by week 6 onwards, we think you're looking at a stud running back. And then Dwayne Brown. Now, playing the entirety of last season with a torn rotator cuff definitely hurt his production as a blocker. The exact surgery date is a little unclear from reporting, but presumably it was close to the end of the season. Return timeline is minimum 4 to 6 months, but for an older offensive lineman, projects to be in the 6 to 7 range. After 9 months post-op, we wouldn't anticipate much production impact, so altogether, if we assume a January surgery date, Brown would have an excellent chance to play week 1, probably ramping up his production to peak form by mid-October. And then across on the other side of the line, Mekhi Becton. His right knee has been through at least 2 surgeries now. The good news is that they don't seem incredibly related. One was for a cartilage cleanup a couple years ago, and then last year for what sounds like instability of his kneecap. His return timeline should allow him back on the field without restriction at this point, but the first half of the season does project to be a ramp-up period for him, and that's especially true if they keep Becton at right tackle, where the push-off strength demanded of his right knee is the highest. Look for him to improve gradually over the course of the season, probably reaching peak pre-injury form likely by about week 12. And then Von Miller. Now, week 1 is a possible target for him post-ACL, but the more likely outcome here is about week 4 to 6. His age being 34 certainly does work against him, but kind of neutralizing that in our data is his very elite athleticism, over 90th percentile in most of his pre-injury metrics. So overall, we're predicting Von Miller likely in the early part of the season around week 4, and with some mild production dip for his first 6 games back. And then we have Tua Tagovailoa. Now, we're rooting hard for this one. We do expect Tua to be back at 100% week 1. Despite the seriousness of last year's concussion history, we don't typically see a production dip when players return. The key here, though, is the risk going forward, and especially given the high-profile nature of NFL concussions and really particularly Tua's case last year, we'd anticipate that any concussion from here on out takes him at least 2 to 4 weeks to return. Additionally, at this point, any such injury should be considered a potential career ender. Now, Tua has added some weight, and that should help, as should his off-season jiu-jitsu training to help protect his head specifically. But the key here is really Tua's O-line. Pocket quarterback health correlates strongly with the number of hits taken, and to that effect, Teron Armstead coming back at full strength week 1 should help, and we have to assume the Dolphins' offense is going to prioritize both getting the ball out quickly and running the ball as they drafted a new running back as well. So nobody can really predict concussions, but overall we're reassured by the emphasis they've placed on all of the steps needed to protect Tua so far. And then on the defensive side of the ball, we have Brandon Jones. November ACL surgery means an average of about 10 months to return for Jones. So by our data, he does have about a 50% chance of playing week 1. The demands of playing safety are tough on players that soon after an ACL. Expect him to see a fairly noticeable performance dip in the early phase, but he should be back to about 90% by mid-season. And then Michael Onwenu. Ankle surgery for an O-lineman is a tough comeback, but his projected timeline gives him a very good chance to be ready right around the start of the season. We have plenty of data on position players saying that they don't see performance hits, but the nature of the O-line position makes us think this one could require a noticeable ramp up. Look for Onwenu to be on the field sometime in the first 4 to 6 weeks, if not week 1, but for that ramp up to last him about 4 to 6 weeks into his return. And that's all we have for today. Pumped to be joining you today and all off season, and I'll kick it back to you.
Payne, we're listening to Deepak. He used the same term over and over again. He talked about draft grade and elite athleticism. So, should something bad ever happen to you or I, hopefully we're not shelved for an extended period of time, since we both have elite athleticism, so our podcasting ability shouldn't drop off in the least.
I'm just happy that you made it back from Africa, because apparently this podcast would have went away had you perished. So,
look, you can find a very capable host in a variety of capacities, but it's not going to be the same dynamic. We know that to be the case. Thankfully, we were in Jeeps. I didn't have to run away from any lions. I know you sent me some social media footage with a lion jumping into the back of a Jeep. We didn't have to endure any of that. The tsetse flies played it light and easy on us. There were no rhinos or elephants that had me running for my life. I don't know if I have quite the first step at north of 40 that I did 10 years ago when we started this fine endeavor.
You just have to be faster than the slowest person.
Hey, look, we had a group that I don't think there was a ton of foot speed. When you take those kind of trips, if I wasn't one of the faster individuals in that particular group, then it may be an indictment of my declining athleticism at this point. But no doubt, a great trip, to say the least, but one that I'm thankful to be back, of sound mind and body, that allows us to preview all of these divisions in extreme depth. And with the AFC East kind of in that rear view mirror, before we put a bow on this podcast, it's where we go for an actionable element. I know win totals have been on the move all off season, but if there's a man that can delve into some of the markets out there and find an edge, I know we're leaning on you. Where are you taking us with our second NFL best bet? The reason I say second is because hopefully everybody that listened to our offseason preview has a Rams ticket in hand with a number that is no longer available, as you said it wouldn't be.
I forgot about that. You were spot on. And I will share the same sentiment I did last season. I'm not sure we'll have 8 best bets for each division. If we have an edge, we have an edge. Could be a couple season-long player props along the way. The best bets certainly won't always be correlated to the division we're discussing in that moment, but there are bets that we've made that I think still have value, and I don't want to wait until that division comes up in our preview series to get it out, because it may move past a point where there is no longer value. So for the first time in a decade, we're going to give out a best bet without reasoning, the ultimate cliffhanger, okay? It's going to be the Dallas Cowboys over 9.5 wins minus $1.62. There's a bunch of 160 and 165 out there. You're going to have to tune into our NFC East preview in a few short days on Monday the 7th. We'll end this show with the Cowboys, and because we go in alphabetical order, we'll start the next show with the Dallas Cowboys and tell you why we're buying Jerry Jones and Big D this season.
You know what's wild around here? People accuse us all the time of having that East Coast bias. I feel like one of these years we're going to have to go west to east and start with your beloved AFC West. The NFC West is an afterthought. If it was up to me, we probably would even preview that other than the 49ers, but a different discussion for a different day. But we'll knock out the East, and those people who are waiting, trying to figure out which division we're going to get to, well, that's why you tune in every Monday and Thursday for the month of August. We will have you up to speed, ready to lock and load by the time we get to the NFL Week 1 opener between the Kansas City Chiefs and the Detroit Lions. My friend, I think we're off to a rousing start, as we always are. It is cute, though, when you tell me I think we're going to be able to get a division preview knocked out in an hour. We end up tacking on an extra 30 minutes because you get rolling, and there's so much great information that's out there. I know our listeners have timestamps. They can listen to one team at a time. They can fast forward to the best bet, but they will be ready for all things National Football League by the time the calendar gets to September.
Oh, no doubt. And I think what's funny to me is we've kind of had the same formula and format going on half a decade now, right? With when these previews drop, with who we talk about, in which order, and everyone has the same questions. I would have thought our listeners listened a little bit better.
They get antsy every year. I mean, they're so saturated with inferior football content that's out there. And while I know a lot of us bet college in the NFL is still king. So they see all of those Power 5 conference previews, and they're like JoJo the circus dog, that they start to get the shakes. They want the NFL action. But yes, we go east to west. The AFC East could be one of the best divisions in football. Plenty of drama and intrigue. No easy wins to be found. And it's part of the reason we started there before we get to the NFC East, where we may have a separation of the haves and have-nots.
The subscribe button will set you free. You hit subscribe, and when something goes live, you get a notification to your phone.
It is a novel concept. There is no doubt about it. Anything else you'd like to say before we bid our listeners a fond farewell? I know you're going to be glued to your TV set for the preseason opener Hall of Fame game between the Brown and Jets, so it's just not coincidence that the first preview podcast we offer up is with the unofficial start of the NFL season.
Yeah, I wasn't thinking about that. I thought you were going to talk about Team USA, women's soccer at 5 a.m.
No, well, I mean, look, they've underachieved, but the bottom line is
Jeez,
they've at least been better than the German national team, who bows out with an unceremonious draw against South Korea after getting upset by Colombia. So, yeah, there's still a little bit of intrigue there. You know, someday, hopefully, our men can achieve the heights of the women, but there's a target on their back, so we'll see exactly if they're still alive and playing when we record our next podcast on Monday. No, I was talking about the NFL opener because I know you want to see how much Zach Wilson has matured when he gets to lead a team of UPS drivers out there in Canton, Ohio.
That will be interesting to watch. Looking forward to it.
So we'll see what we have. But remember, like Payne said, hit the subscribe button. You'll know the moment one of these podcasts drops for the NFL, both preseason editions, regular season, college football, you name it, and everything else we do around the Bet the Board home offices. So follow Payne on Twitter, @PayneInsider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there as well. Most importantly, as always, follow the Bet the Board podcast @BetTheBoardPod and sign up for the Bet the Board podcast newsletter delivered each and every week right to your mailbox. Most importantly, though, when we get to early January with a Dallas Cowboys win total over the total in hand, we'll see you at the window.
Thanks for listening to Bet the Board. You can catch Todd and Payne every Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday during football season, breaking down the biggest NFL and college football games. And to make sure you don't miss any free best bets, subscribe to Bet the Board on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.